there's a few stages in the joy of art. Often it starts from pain. That's the weird thing. So it will start from some pain or discomfort, usually, move into like self-expression and self-therapy. But then there's this other bit where you connect to others through it and they see it and they see you through it. And you get to change something in the world or in the way people see you or others, or you can change misconceptions, like with iMama, changing the way people looked at motherhood in the art. So I think it's a huge bit, and it would be a shame to lose that.
Welcome to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I am your host, Raymond Hatfield, and today we are chatting with photographer, filmmaker Karni Arieli about changing the perception of motherhood through images. Now, this episode is brought to you by CloudSpot, the all-in-one solution to deliver and even sell your photos online. You can grab your free forever CloudSpot account with 10 gigabytes of photo storage over at deliverphotos.com. Now, Karni has released a book called iMama, Poetic Truths of Home and Motherhood, which is full of images that she curated. So while she is a photographer and filmmaker in her own right, and we do talk a lot about her own personal photography, we also spend time talking about the image curation process, choosing images that tell an honest story, how to choose one image over another, the technical and emotional elements that she looks for to include, all the things that you do when you cull through your own work. So there's a lot here for everybody. And I will, of course, link to the book in the show notes as well. And I highly encourage you to give it a look. Pick it up. Pick it up if you're a mother, if you're married to somebody who is a mother, or you just know somebody who is a mother. It is a beautifully printed book that does a great job at showing all of the honest and frustrating and messy sides of motherhood and just parenting that I found easy to relate to as well. So be sure to stick around to the end, where I'm going to share my 3 biggest takeaways from this interview so that you can start to take these lessons that you hear on the podcast and implement them into your own photography. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into today's interview. Karni, my first question for you, I try to keep this an easy one. I want to know, when did you know that photography, and in particular just creating images or telling stories, was going to be an important role in your life?
I'm not sure. I think I was a late bloomer, to be honest, because I didn't really find photography till I was maybe 16, which I think for today feels really late, considering everyone grows up with an iPhone and a camera and another iPhone. And, so I had a camera knocking about that was my grandfather's and my dad's. And I think at some point when I was a teenager, I started directing my friends a little bit and my sister, and creating small stories that I think helped me make sense of the world. I think people who are creative, I knew I wasn't a writer, but I wasn't sure what I was. And I think when I started taking pictures and I saw they were interesting and I liked creating, in a way, slightly fantastical scenarios, actually, and working with people and portraits in particular, I just felt that I was good at it, that I had something to say. And I think what was coming out was this: often photography is really good at channeling something subliminal, something from under the surface that you haven't said verbally or that you haven't even thought of, but it will come out there in your art and kind of face you and confront you. And I think it felt therapeutic, as well as like that I knew what I wanted to see or create. So, and it kind of evolved from there. And then I started shooting some fashion shoots or some little portraits for people and building my confidence, going to art school. And at some point there was no looking back. Like, I think it felt very natural to me. I come from a family of storytellers, but much more verbal communicators or more writing. And I am a talker, but I feel like when I talk, it's like I'm too much in control in a way. It's like I'm saying what I want to say, whereas when I photograph, the photograph tells me what it wants to be. And I think that's a much more, in a way, maybe honest communication, or surprising, or I guess artistic, because it kind of comes, it just like comes from nowhere nearly. And I guess that's inspiration. That's maybe the people who are in front of you. And that's like all the dots connecting, the camera being there, you having your point of view, and the person you're interacting with or the scenario just coming into place in your square frame. Suddenly you'll just see something that makes sense or that's interesting, or a light that hits it just so, or whatever. And, that point of view of the world, I guess it brings me joy as well. Like, I guess finding pieces of beauty in a world that can often not make sense brings me joy. So I stuck to it.
You had those thoughts at 16 years old? Because I remember
No.
the thoughts that I had at 16, and they were nowhere near that poignant.
This is all, I don't think you know any story until you look backwards.
Mm.
So I think only in hindsight you can make sense of like what steps you took and what led you there. I think when I was younger, I just probably was a bit lost and picked up a camera, and it helped me make sense, right? So, and it helped me connect with people and have some fun. And in a very basic sense, I think it was just like cool or whatever, or just like something I could do that not everyone could do. And then I think in hindsight, it was all these things that I understood that, I come from divorced parents and I had a good childhood, but I think I was a little bit lost. I was going to a lot of parties, and I think I wanted to make sense of what I was seeing and the world. And this helped me. This tool was something. And this looking closely at things is something I enjoy.
So then let me ask, back then when you were 16, you had mentioned earlier going to art school, also doing some fashion. Did you jump straight into, say, portraits at that time, or were you just photographing everyday life?
I don't think I ever really photographed everyday life. That came when I was much older. Like now I like to just find things on walks or with my kids and photograph them, but or maybe direct parts of it, have a mix. But I think at the beginning I like to create scenes because life didn't seem that fascinating when you go to school and you're like doing the walk and you're in school and then you're home, living at home, but kind of like dreaming of other things. And I think I had to create fantasies. I remember climbing into a tree with my mom's old wedding dress and somebody taking a picture of me and then me photographing my friend who I was with. And so like we would like wear clothes or go into slightly surreal scenarios to maybe, I guess, create little stories. And even when I did fashion, it wasn't really fashion. I'd try and get them placed in some magazines, but I think it was more like little scenes of fantasy that were acting out, I guess, the way I felt in the world, or like things I was uncomfortable with, or things I didn't know, or things I did know, but not using myself ever as the subject. I always used someone else. I never did I did do some self-portraiture when I was in art school, but mostly I like to focus on other people. But I think it's a self-portrait still, even though it's like I'm casting someone as me. That's how I see it.
Wow. Yeah, I completely get that. It's like I've said it on the podcast before. There's that Ansel Adams quote that there's two people in every photo. There's the photographer and there's the viewer. So in a sense, you are injecting a piece of yourself into every photo. I love that.
Absolutely.
So at what point you said that you had went to art school? I have found in talking with people that they either go to school for one of two reasons. One, because it's just what you do, or two, they know that they're lacking in that area. They know exactly where they're lacking and they need to get better. So I guess which one of the two camps do you feel like you fit into? Or is there a third camp?
The camp that your mom signs you up to art school because she's afraid you're lost
Oh,
and
I
you're
see.
going to travel forever and never come back. And she signed me up to this art school that was more of a general art school. And I started dabbling in all sorts of art, so sculpture, painting, and photography. But I think that was a really nice, rounded way of trying out different things. But I knew I was always best at photography. Like I did some sculpture, I like that. I'm horrible at drawing. I like dance theatre, I like moving image, and I like photography. And again, they're all like very much related to the eye and less to like the hand. I'm not very crafty, but I've got a good eye. And so painting didn't suit me. But once I was there, I decided to then specialize and move on more to focus on photography. And I think I did love, once I decided to like follow that strength, you get in deeper. And I think I did really enjoy like history of photography, going into the dark room with all those like smells and like seeing an image come up on a paper. I guess it's like like being a magician, you're like capturing, you know how they always say like that people, you can capture their soul in a photograph or whatever, or they'd be scared to be photographed in case you steal their soul. And I think there is some like magic and like fantasy and mystery in the whole process of like capturing an image, because one minute it's in the world and another it's on a paper. And it doesn't really make sense. Like, even though I know the process, something about that is totally bonkers. If you think about it, like when people discovered photography, they must have been blown away to like own a piece of the world on a piece of paper. It's kind of crazy. And I think that's what's really incredible, that you get to own the world and you get to own it through your own eyes. So you create or you see the world in a certain way, and that perspective and that point of view is then collected onto this piece of paper or like image you can own and, you know, show. And it explains so much often, and it's really exciting. So, and then of course, looking at other people's work is really crucial, and collaboration. You know, my eldest is now 17 and he's in art school. And I always say to him, the one thing that I think is really crucial in art school is like to collaborate and to learn from each other and to do trial and error and to make a million horrible pieces of work and then a good piece of work. Because what we often don't realize is once you go into the world, it's a lot harder to play around. Like then you have to make a living, you have to have an apartment, you have to like move out of your mom's or whatever, or not, you know. And so I'm like, well, really just go crazy in art school, like really make everything, don't get drunk and lie on the floor for the whole 2 years. That's not going to get you anywhere. I mean, you really should just like play a lot and try things and experiment and collaborate and be inspired. Often the best ideas, we know this from people who have made it big in the world, they're usually inspired by other things like cross-pollination and little ideas that come into their ether. And I'm sure I've been influenced along the way by lots of books I've seen and people I've met. And so I think that's really important in the sense of like the art school. And it's so much fun, like everyone getting together to discuss and make art, which in the grander scheme of things, like in the world, art isn't considered in a par with like being a doctor or a lawyer. But in art school, you are the doctor and the lawyer, right? Because it's like the place, it's like where you're considered like the big shot in art school is like the person who makes great art. And so I think that's a really good place to get confident. And so I did quite a few years in art school, and but not everybody needs it. You know, my partner's more of a like, he teaches himself more, he's like self-taught, and he's a bit more of a loner, but he's also an animator. They tend to be loners,
They
you know.
do,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Animators,
it's
editors,
different.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a different type of person. And not everybody loves the art school. And I don't think you can teach art. Like, I think you can teach everything that goes around it, like history of art, like the techniques. You can like help people hone in on what they're talented at, and like the critiques are really useful to like figure stuff out, to know what you want to stand up for. And but in another way, I think you should really follow what you love and what you know is best, because people feel more comfortable with what they already know and have already seen, which means that anything that's avant-garde or forward thinking is at first going to be treated with suspicion. Like people aren't going to always fall in love with it straight away. Just like a song that's like a bit more catchy, right? And you like love it straight away. But then the weird ones you really fall in love with, but it takes time sometimes.
So then let me ask you a question. This isn't really related to the podcast, but do you think that art can exist then in a vacuum? If we can't teach art, but we have to teach essentially, it sounds like the self-expression and show art in the past. Do you think that art can be created without, oh, but I guess that's hard because I mean, you can see everything as a form of art. So you can get inspiration everywhere. I don't know. I'll let you answer that question. Do you think that art can exist in a vacuum?
I don't know. I mean, I think part of the joy of art is there's a few stages in the joy of art. One of it, often it starts from pain. That's the weird thing. So it will start from some pain or discomfort, usually, move into like self-expression and self-therapy. But then there's this other bit where you connect to others through it, and they see it and they see you through it. and you get to change something in the world or in the way people see you or others. And I feel that that is quite a big part of art. So I would say that in a vacuum you might get some satisfaction, but I think there's a huge part of it that's in the connection and in taking it out into the world. Other people connect to you that like your art, and people see it and feel better looking at your art. And you can change misconceptions, like with I Mama, changing the way people looked at motherhood in the art. So I think it's a huge bit, and it would be a shame to lose that. But of course, if you take a pile of like sticks in the forest and do a little sculpture and nobody sees it, that's still art, right? I mean, maybe only the squirrels will enjoy it, but
Squirrels need art
it
too.
they need art too. So, and by the way, I think you can teach art in the sense that I think just through someone going through a process of failure and success, trial and error, collaboration and like solitude, learning tools, honing in on their vision, that is teaching something. Like that's teaching a lot. It's the only thing I think you can't teach probably is that something, that either perspective that you have on the world or that spark of inspiration that you'd probably need to get in there. But possibly it could rub off on you from others as well. Like maybe you go in and you're a bit like, I don't know, but then you get the bug, right? You get into it more deeply. So I think you can change as a person too. I think there's that option. We're not just one line, right? We have an arc. So I think it can be taught. I just feel like there's probably some bit that you come with, and that is your own point of view on the world, your own take on the world, your own eye. And that's what makes it unique. That's what makes it special.
Yeah, yeah. So then let's kind of switch gears here. I could talk about this stuff all day and it's really exciting, but I know that I have you for a limited time. So I want to talk about your project, iMama. In your own words, can you tell me, like, what was the seed that had started this whole project? Maybe it wasn't fully formed yet, but what had got this ball rolling?
Well, it was 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020 because we were all in the same little blue planet that was suddenly unified by having this virus, this COVID epidemic that broke out. And we were all going into lockdown. I live in Bristol, UK. We were at home. I had two kids at that time. I have two kids, but at that time they were 5 and 15, maybe. I have a big gap. So one of them was 5, the little one. When lockdown started, I was like everyone else, like quite scared and like, oh my God, is this the end of humanity? And I do what I usually do. I was a bit sick at the beginning. I might have had COVID. And when I started recovering, I picked up the camera. And that usually gives me some power back to document and makes me feel like things are going to be okay. Because if you're thinking about art, you're probably not dying. Usually there's like, you're going to be okay. So, I was documenting. It might be a false reassurance, by the way, but it is reassuring. Because obviously, like a photojournalist might think that, and that might not be the case. But anyway, I was documenting my kids in the garden and documenting light on the wall and little things to bring me joy and to connect to the world and try and make sense of everything that was a bit bonkers. I'm lucky to have a garden. And so I was taking these pictures and I was scrolling on social media because I'm also a filmmaker. And I work with my partner. We're a directing duo called Karni and Sulky Bunny is our studio. And I was scrolling on social media and seeing my feed. I follow a lot of women. I follow a lot of the female gaze because that's what interests me. And I guess I feel like that's my people, right? Like a lot of visions and visuals made by women. And traditionally in art school, you're seeing the male gaze a lot. So for me, it was like more fresh and more personal. And so I'm looking at all these images and literally on my feed, nearly like a curated feed, I just see endless images of like these peepholes into homes worldwide, taken by women and mothers onto their own families, like an introspective look at motherhood, home, and family within pandemic, like the head of a child, a mushed biscuit, crushed biscuit on the floor, a mother holding a child, a self-portrait of a mother breastfeeding, a child having a tantrum, all of these things that we know so well, but I never deemed that interesting, but I was finding this portfolio fascinating. Like I couldn't look away because I was going through the same thing myself. So I'm a mum and I'm a photographer. So that that cross section of my artist self and my mother self had this cross section, and I had never really photographed I always photographed my kids, but I hadn't sent it out into the world that much and or used it. And the art world is usually quite exclusive and doesn't really deem family life as interesting in the art world or whatever. And I would kind of leave it at home like a separate identity. But here what I was seeing was all these photojournalists, all these art photographers, all these fine art women and artists were photographing the same thing. They were all like, they had no choice. They were all turning the camera inwardly. So usually they would be like on a job or going here or there. And suddenly they were all forced to do that kind of look at themselves. And I was like, wow, this is so incredible. This body of work that's by professional photographers looking at something that was deemed uninteresting in history, boring, mundane, even looked, oh, you're just a mom, oh, you're just a dad, oh, boring, ho, boring, boring, or like not art worthy or whatever. Suddenly I was like, oh my God, this looks like really powerful work. And I wonder if anyone's ever collected it. And then did some research and was like, well, there's one book from 2013 called Home Truths with very few artists. It's a good book, but like well-known fine artists, very minimal in number. And I couldn't find anything else. There's Family of Man that's mostly taken by men. There's a few mothers in there. There's a few women photographers in there, but it's like it was taken in a time where it was impossible. And I was like, what if we'd collect all of this work and make a platform and a book? And in history, like 1,000 years from now, people could pick up a book and say, oh, this is what motherhood looked like in 2020. Because we don't have that for world wars or other big events, major events, famine or war or the world wars or the Holocaust. You don't have those bodies of work because there weren't enough women who are mothers who were empowered enough to be photographers. And the men were usually pointing their lenses outwardly because that's where the interesting things were deemed to be, like outward. Nobody, like often, very few people turn their lens inwardly. So then I started collecting it on Instagram slowly, and the rest is history. It just dawned on me. I couldn't believe this body of work didn't exist because parenthood and motherhood has existed forever, since the dawn of time. And since photography existed, obviously, at first there weren't any women or very few women. There were actually few women quite from the start, but I think they just weren't enough. And then I found out the world at 2020 was such that there were so many women photographers. And a lot of these women photographers happened to be mothers. So it's not like I'm saying all these mothers were taking pictures. It was, first of all, these were photographers who happened to be mothers, who happened to be looking at a subject, which is motherhood. And because there's so many stories and pictures of motherhood that are unrealistic, whether it's influencers or culture or commercials, all telling us false things and misconceptions about parenthood and motherhood that make us feel bad or shamed or just don't feel truthful, I was like, what's better than telling your own story? These are women and mothers telling their own story, and that's a huge power. That's the ultimate, telling your own story.
So then why, let me ask, where did the decision come to curate the photos of others rather than sharing your story?
Because I saw the potential. I think it was bigger than me. I think it was like the first time that I was like, my kid's 5. I'm quite desperate at home. I'm kind of in this lock, but our film was like put on hold a bit. Our film work was like on slow motion. And they just saw this little gap where I could look out of my own bubble, out of my own comfort zone, and be like, wow, maybe I could do something that actually had some meaning, not just about my own existence, but for others and other women of my tribe. Parents, women who are artists and mothers are my tribe in a way. This was a perfect storm, right? Everyone's home. There's pandemic. There's a million photographer women and mothers now because we're sort of advanced, supposedly, in humanity. And everyone's like doing self-portraiture, and there's this like beautiful portfolio appearing. And by the way, to me, beautiful doesn't mean perfect or like happy. Like I feel you get happy by sharing truthful images, not happy images. So I was looking for like the light and dark, the duality in motherhood, the beauty within the details and the hardships. So no fake influencer type content, which that we had loads of, right? Like there's loads of that. Yeah. And then, do you know what? I've never had this before in my life. And again, this sounds like on the verge of religious, but I really felt a calling because I felt obliged. I knew how this could be. I knew how the work should be and could be. I saw the potential and I thought, if I walk away from this, it might never be made. Sometimes when you see stuff, you can't unsee it. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, it was my calling to make it. And I knew I could make it well. And I just saw it. I had a vision of what this book would be, what this platform would be. And I just knew I could do it. And so I just started trying to make it, not really knowing where it would lead. But sometimes making that one first step is the hardest, like naming a platform, iMama project, owning it, and then saying to some friends of mine, do you want to feature on this idea I have and I'll tag you? And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. Then you've got like 10 frames, little frames on a grid. And that's like the beginning. And then in a way, the project takes its own life. Like from then on, it's not really that you control the narrative. You can push it. You can try and make it one thing or another, but it's also got its own life because you've put it out there.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that then, because you knew that you wanted to collect these images. So you had started posting them on Instagram with the hopes of attracting attention so that others would start to do the same. But you said that you knew that this was going to become a project, this was going to become a book. So you knew from the beginning that you were going to have to start curating photos. And when I had just checked right before our interview, there was more than 65,000 images on Instagram that are tagged with iMama Project. But in your book, there's only 228 photos. So talk to me about, you had mentioned there that it's not necessarily your story to tell, it's the story of others. But when you're curating this book, this series of images, how do you do that? And do you try to separate yourself from that decision-making process? Or is that the piece of art that you're putting into the project?
First of all, I think I found a new talent. You know how we said we're all beginners, and this goes together well with your podcast, but I was a newbie curator. Like I was a beginner as a curator. So even though I'd done film and photography for years, and I had a good eye, I knew I had a good eye, right? And I had a really good sense of what motherhood was because I am one. And I have a good sense of what a good photograph is because I'm a photographer. And I knew what was missing from the world because I basically made the book that I was missing, right? So I say it's for everyone, but it's also really for me. Like I am everyone, right? Because I'm filling the gap of that invisible book that was meant to be there, but isn't there, of what is motherhood today through the eyes of artists and women who are photographers, looking at their own motherhood, like telling their own story. And when I curated it, I just think that women and mothers and fathers and carers have to support each other, like women elevating other women. And I think if you're doing something that makes other women feel bad, never mind the whole thing of like turning your life into an online circus and like constantly showcasing kids and all of, that's a whole other thing that I don't really want to get into, but of course is an issue. I just think I don't want to be involved in something that makes other people feel they're less good,
Sure,
at caring because of it. And I think that I hope that through this book and this project, women feel that motherhood can be more normalized, to have motherhood that's imperfect and fatherhood that's imperfect, but like full of love. I think we relate better to imperfections because humanness is imperfect. I think they just popped out at me from Instagram. To me, a good image is, on one hand, like it needs good lighting, a good point of view, like we said, like I need to feel that person's point of view, what their world is. So like a peephole into their world, something intimate, something with maybe nice lighting, maybe something surprising or shocking. Definitely not the obvious. So if I've seen it loads before, I don't want to curate it. What I want to curate is the unseen. So basically, I'm trying to curate something that's been unseen up until now and that I see. So it's like I have this kind of special vision, X-ray vision, into what visibility of motherhood should be, but isn't. And that's what I curated. So also it's a balance of like light and dark. So light and dark is a big part of photography. It's really important in how you frame a photograph, shoot it, and also in the content. I wanted to make sure I had joy and hardship, disappointment, tantrums, dirt, filth, spillage, but also like beauty, skin, touch, softness, connection. And I didn't want to scare people away by portraying motherhood as this kind of insane thing, which it is on some level.
It is.
Right. So, and then on the other hand, it's also this magic thing where you have a being and you nurture it, and it's hard, but anything good is hard. Anything worthwhile is going to be hard. But I think by portraying motherhood as like this kind of fantasy, Madonna images and fantasy, like I'm baking apple pies and juggling and holding 7 kids while wearing white, when we're doing an injustice to women, we're faking it. And when they finally reach it, and to fathers too, and to anyone who's caring and a parent, we're creating this fake world where then when you enter parenthood, you feel like you're doing it badly because, or you're doing something wrong because it doesn't look like that, right? Because it doesn't look like the fantasy that people have sold you. But, you know, just like we know love stories aren't Hollywood, parenthood isn't Hollywood or influencers or Pampers commercials either. And very soon I realized I wanted it to be global and inclusive. So I knew I couldn't have it with just women who looked like me and thought like me. I wanted it to be women from all around the world. I wanted it to be diverse, and I wanted it to have all the narratives like adoption and fostering and single mom and gay couples and miscarriage and abortion and all the different narratives that lead up to parenting and that are parenting, to be as inclusive as possible. And also I wanted to be as inclusive as possible in the sense that I said to anyone, you can join if you consider yourself a mama. And I used mama as a term of endearment so that any carer who lives with kids could consider themselves a mama. You don't have to give birth necessarily. And anyone who considered themselves a photographer. So again, I didn't ask for credentials. I didn't ask for exhibitions or a resume, because I think we need to level the playing field. And I think women have enough penalties as it is, and parents have enough penalties as it is. And so to help women advance in this really tricky time of being parents to young kids, I included women who were well known as well as unknown, which is like a big curveball in the art community. Like for curation, it's not considered a thing that you do, because obviously if you're into sales, you want to do well-established photographers.
Sure.
But I had nothing to lose. Like something, when you have nothing to lose, you can take bigger risks, because I wasn't a curator and I wasn't making any money. So by not exchanging any money with these women, not making any and not asking for any, I had complete creative freedom. The only thing that was missing was me earning the trust of these women. So obviously, when you're dealing with the most intimate photography that women can give out into the world, they like to know that you're a mama too. They like to know that you're a photographer too. They like to see your curation style. One of my favorite images is one by Julie Renee Jones from America. And it's an image that was in National Geographic that showcased the project. And it's just a hand reaching out from a crib into a beam of light. And the crib and the room are quite dark. And the light is like the hand is flexed, like a zombie hand, or like when a baby falls and their hand is like ding, like really straight and stiff. And all you can see is that hand, and it's in this beam of light. And I love that image. I just love that image, because not only did it feel to me like humanity trying to reach for the light in COVID, trying to survive, it's also about that little baby, that all our world is in that little crib in the dark. And then that beam of light just illuminates that hand. And it's just a detail, you know, it lets you fill in the rest. It leaves a lot to the imagination, which I think is really crucial too.
That's a lot of the fun of art, is leaving something up to the imagination, for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm interested as a photographer. We know that a great photo is more than the sum of its settings. We know that the story is like so important here. But as a photographer, you do have to know the technical side of photography. So when you were looking at these images, how much of that played a role into the selections that you put into the book versus just the story, just the moment?
Well, because I knew I wanted it to be a book and a platform by photographers, by professional photographers, I'd seen projects that had started in pandemic that were for non-professionals, people on iPhones, documenting, right? But that's not what I had in mind, because at the end of the day, I do have a certain appreciation for the aesthetics, the professional photographers. I like people who shoot on medium format, on SLRs, DSLRs. I think the iPhone is really useful when you're a mom and you want to just document your everyday. But I think if you're going to create an iconic one specific image that's really powerful, you're going to want to use a better tool. Saying that, the book and the project have iPhone images. So I broke my own rules. I made them and then I broke them. But what I tried to do was get the best images I could find that portrayed motherhood as a complex issue. So you have to, I call it the honey, like visual pleasure is the honey. You want to draw all these little fireflies to the honey and the light first. And then you can dish out any old story you want to dish out. People will swallow anything if it's covered in honey, just like that paracetamol pill or medicine that you'll cover in honey, right? So I feel that the duality of Mama and the hard, more truthful tales that are in there sometimes still need to be kind of wrapped up in this photographic aesthetic language, right? Because we're still dealing with an art form, right? And again, I never asked for credentials. I never knew. I think your eye can often tell what is like a casual snapshot that's meant for the home and for your own photo book, and what is something more iconic that you've managed to capture. I was fully aware that touching on childhood and motherhood on the internet, which is the Wild West and not the perfect place for any portfolio, definitely not for women. We got removed and censored a lot. That's a whole other story by Instagram for showing breastfeeding images and other things. So I was just very aware that I didn't want to show kids in full nudity. I would show skin and I would show suggestions of intimacy. That was just my mother instinct. That's the interesting thing. I just showed work that I would probably be okay with myself and respected that. And as the trust grew between the photographers who were submitting and myself, as my confidence grew, there were friendships that formed. So the first 1,000 women who joined, I probably know them all personally, or the first 500, because we would chat to each other on DMs and connect in lockdown, and like this kind of delicate spider web of eyes and hearts all over the world, interconnecting and sending these images and forming this undercurrent of the story of motherhood visibly, and inspiring each other, and being inspired by each other's images. And so in a way that was an art school for us, in a sense, getting together like that.
No, of course, yeah. Being able to share images, talk about those photos, and come up with new ideas is, I mean, for me, that's where I found the biggest benefit of film school. It wasn't so much learning the technical abilities. I think anybody can do that. But as you were saying earlier, the collaboration is it. You don't have to go to school for that. If you have a way of doing that on your own, you can get a lot of the same output.
Absolutely.
And this will be my last question here for you, because I know that we're officially over our time. But when you have these different steps, when you have all of these people who are giving their opinion, how do you know that you've reached the finish line? How do you know that you're ready? You put the stamp on it and you say, send it to print. We are done. Because it seems to me like that process could just go on forever.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the toughest bits. I think, first of all, you have a deadline, right? So I think knowing that we wanted the book out at a certain time, the publication was waiting, because they also, don't forget, the publication usually, they gave me total creative freedom to know as they're a German publication, but they also have a veto. So they can look at some images or try and influence you one way or another if they think it's going to harm the book or that they don't see eye to eye with you. I was very lucky that I got to really make the book I wanted with the text I wanted. It's got a few interesting texts in there about motherhood and about my process, and also some quotes that I really wanted in there. But I think in the end, also because I also had this vision from the start, and it had this flavor, the mama gaze had this flavor that I kind of knew was this flavor of the mama gaze that was unseen, and this book that I was looking for in a way. And it's quite hard to describe, but it's built up of all these pieces, all of these things that I've mentioned before, the imperfections, the duality, dark and light. I think when I got as close as I could, then at some point I was like, well, I also have to know that this is the best I can do for now. This is never going to be a perfect book. And it's either you try forever to get something iconic, but it might take you 5 years. And by then somebody would have made another book or 20 books, or you wouldn't have been able to make it or whatever. Or you make the book that you can make now. And I was very intent on making it within the year once I pitched the book project, because I knew it was a contemporary, urgent topic with abortion rights in the States and paid leave rights being threatened and all these issues, expensive childcare all over the world and like women's rights and da da. It's like a hot topic and really important for change. But I feel like you can't empower the invisible. Like first you need visibility and then you can empower something. It was just a version. In the end, I had to like, again, give myself permission to say, this is the best version of the book I can get to. And once I changed my mind a million times and fought for things I was passionate about, some images I was in love with, right? So I would fight for, and nothing could change my mind. But some images I would fight for and they'd be like, nah, this is too much or bloody or whatever. I'd like, so sometimes like how much you're willing to fight for something is also your parameter or like your assessment on like how important it is. Because when you're tired, you're like, okay, I'll just fight for that, but I won't fight for that. And you have to do a compromise. And so it just like, you know, the graphic designer put pressure on me in the publication to close it up. And I had to just face the music and be like, okay, this is it. And of course, as soon as I shut it, I was like, oh God, I forgot that mum. Oh God, that image could have been amazing in there. And then when I went back to the long list, I was like, oh God, I would love. But of course, once you have the book done, the other images that you haven't looked at for a long time look fresher, look like more exciting. So there's also that weird thing of like the new to you. So the new to me was new when I started the book, but then it became the old. But to other people, it will be the fresh. So when you make art, you have to be careful of that as well, that what you've lived with for a long time can seem like not that interesting anymore. Like you've seen it, you've seen it. It doesn't have that exciting, oh my God, look at that image. Because you've gotten used to it, just like with love or relationship or whatever, you have to really trust yourself in the process. And that's some of the hardest things to do is you have to, that thing of like faking it or like believing in yourself, even if you have those doubts and selling it to others, that self-belief in the project and yourself. I think that's really crucial because without it, without that fire and that self-belief, things are going to knock you down along the way and throw you off course. You really have to be like absolutely certain in your drive and your mission, but be open enough to accept other people's opinions or like zigzags along the way. But again, I can only say all of this clever stuff in hindsight, right? Like when you're on it, when you're walking on that path, often you fall down, you get up, whatever, you don't see the astronaut perspective when you're in it. It's only when you zoom out that you can like tell what it's been and learn from it. And I'm really grateful for that, for the like insane learning experience and like all these friendships and all this work that I've had the privilege of curating. And because it's really a collective body of work. This is a collective vision by women around the world, which is kind of a first of its kind, definitely in scope. So that's a big satisfaction knowing that and having that.
Of course. As a photographer, it can be hard. We feel like this thing that we're shooting ourselves is us. And whenever there's any sort of criticism on an image, we feel like it's at us. So oftentimes we try not to collaborate with others. But by hearing your story here today, that is something that I've definitely taken away and that I want to do more of, because clearly your energy and this passion that you put in you're able to magnify that when you collaborate with others. So I really appreciate you sharing everything that you have here today, Karni. But I know that listeners are thinking to themselves, I want to see some of these images. I want to know more about this project. So before I let you go, can you share where listeners can find out more about this project online?
Absolutely. I mean, if you Google I'm on a project and I'm on a book, that's the obvious go-to, but there is www.imamaproject.com and there's links in that. It's a very simple website, but it's got all the links to the articles. It's been featured in National Geographic, Vogue, Wall Street Journal, Creative Review, a lot of articles over the time. And also the Instagram, of course, which is I'm on a project, all one word. And the book is on Amazon and all the online usual places that you have. Its distribution is worldwide. But again, I would love people to look at the book. I've always asked for the bookshops to keep one of the copies open so people can look through, get the books for people you love, and also get them for people who you think need to see the story of motherhood. Like sometimes that's really crucial. I wish we could give it to every business and every birth suite and every school, maybe in the future, because I'd love to do more exhibitions as well, and an archive of motherhood. Like there's still more things we could do with it looking forward. There's a lot you can get to through the images that are shared on the Instagram. If you follow the trail to these women who are photographers, it's kind of this endless rabbit hole, but a good rabbit hole, of like interesting photography by women today. So that's really, really nice.
Once again, just a big thank you to Karni for coming on and sharing everything that she did. I'm going to share with you my 3 biggest takeaways that I picked up from this episode. The first one was that real is messy. It's easy to think that a photo has to be beautiful to stand out. A beautiful sunrise, a smiling, happy kid, a perfectly clean and put together house that's not always life. A sunset lasts for like 1/30th of the day. I don't know. And yet, if you only looked at landscape photos, you would think that that's what the sky looked like every day. The people that we watch online, their house may be clean for only the same 1/30th of the day, but because that's all that they show, we assume that they always have their stuff together, always. You have the ability with your camera to tell a beautiful story that is rooted in honesty, even if it's a bit messy. Takeaway number 2 is just the importance of being self-aware. This project would not have happened if some were not self-aware enough to share their real world. Being aware of where you are and recognize how it may be the same as others and how it may differ from others can allow you to see opportunities in what you can share in a way to communicate with others. Takeaway number 2 is also the importance of artistic growth. Curating images has to be hard. You build relationships with these people, you see into their lives, you're trusted with that. And you have to decide what image best tells the story that you want to tell. And if this photo that you love from somebody who you've built a relationship with doesn't fit the story, well, you have to know that, and you have to make the decision to stay true to your vision. As a filmmaker, Karni knows, but there are times where you spend the time and effort to get a shot, and then it just ends up being cut from the final product. It's not about being a bad shot or a waste of time. It's just that didn't fit the overall message that you're going for. And that muscle takes time to develop. It takes time to grow. But the only way to do it is to do it. So that is it for this week. Thank you again for tuning into this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast, brought to you by CloudSpot. Remember to grab your free CloudSpot account over at deliverphotos.com. And remember, the more that you shoot today, the better you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.